Salutations, everybody. It is Maddie here today. I hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. I got to say, I got to speak for myself. I know I am. Today, I'm joined by a luminary in gaming, someone I've looked up to for a really long time and just have the honor of chatting with today, Sir Ken Levine. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today, good sir?
I was actually knighted recently, so I'm glad
Oh,
you were
I have to
keeping
show
up with what's
respect.
going on.
Yeah. But thank you for being here, Ken. I just was so excited to talk to you. Just appreciate you being gracious enough to be here to talk everything from Judas to BioShock to System Shock. And so before we crack into all the high level stuff, I just always like to check in. Just, we work a tough job here. We get to create games, but it's a very arduous process, at times grueling. So I just like to do a little wellness check. Like, how are we doing? How are we feeling? And obviously, I just want to know what games you're playing as of late.
Um, I'm doing relatively well. I mean, as you know, game development is always it's never uninteresting.
Sure.
I think if I hadn't worked in other fields before and been so certain that this is what I wanted to do, some days it would be harder, some days it'd be easier. But I never forget how lucky I am to just be able to go in and like argue about, you know, hacking or, you know, like monsters on a spaceship, because I've done pretty much every other kind of job, and it's always good to remind yourself how lucky you are to do this one.
Sure. Absolutely. What games have you been playing now? Has anything been on the docket, or have we just been working hard on
Uh,
Judas?
I always play games. I've played a ton of Banananza. That's how it's pronounced.
Mm,
Kong. I went back to when I got my Switch to went back to Tears of the Kingdom because
nice.
the performance on the Switch One wasn't great, and so I kind of walked away from it.
Sure.
I spent a ton of time on that, and then I got my Steam library. I mean, I can even go look
Uh-oh.
at it.
Uh-oh.
Playing what is that? Rogue Waters is some weird like pirate game I'm playing. I'm
Oh,
playing.
interesting.
Um, Started Hollow Knight, didn't get very far yet. Undermine 2.
Mm.
Boat Crew. I play a lot of weird. I play like everything, so I play everything.
Yeah, there's a little bit of everything in this here. You got the big indies, big AAA. I've never heard of some of those. Like Rogue Waters is a new one to me. But that's awesome that you're staying connected with it. Because like I've talked to a few developers, as I was telling you before this, and like sometimes they're just like really in the weeds. So is it kind of like a priority for you to like make sure you get that time in with gaming, even when you're working on games? It's just like
I don't really
part
have
of why you're here, right?
a choice. It's such a grounding thing for me, and
Hmm.
it's like games were always my place. I went to where I got away from things.
Yeah,
Even when I was a kid, I didn't really have any. Like my Atari was my pal, right? Because your Atari wouldn't like make fun of you in school or anything like
of
that, or
course. Yeah.
laugh at your comic books you're reading. So like, I was always thought games are a great place to go to like step away from your problems. So I've just been playing. I don't think there's a day I haven't played a video game since I was a little kid.
It's good to hear because sometimes I worry when I hear from developers like, yeah, I haven't played anything in like a really long while. I'm like, I can't relate to that because I find I'm the exact same reason you say. I found it so grounding since I've been a kid. I had never had friends growing up that would play games, like they were all like into sports of anything, so I just never really fit in. So it was like this weird thing I always did until now. It's on just like such a different level where it's more widely accepted to play video games. But I'm
Yeah.
right there with you, just playing every day, something.
Also, as a dev, I mean, look, we all borrow from each other, and I've learned so much. Like I've learned so much from like especially the indie space in the past 5 years or 10 years.
Sure.
So many good things because they're able to experiment more because their costs are lower. So I mean, they have different challenges, right? They generally don't. Their costs are lower, but their money isn't as they don't have always have a strong source of money like a publisher like say too.
Mm.
But a lot of experimentation goes on there, and unlike the film industry, it often just becomes where weird little indie experiments sometimes nobody notices. They
Mm.
get a lot of attention because they have a direct access to the audience through Steam or whatever. So
Yeah.
I love playing games for every reason. It makes me feel I just love seeing the innovation. It's such a cool industry because we've been around. I've been in the industry for almost 30 years.
Uh-oh.
About today, no, in about a month from today, I'll be in the industry for about 30 years where I started Looking Glass. And it still feels like we're still figuring things out, just like we were then. Like
Yeah.
we haven't hit our final form yet. And I just love trying to figure out what that form is.
Do you ever wonder, to cut a little bit deeper, because I sometimes feel like And what do I know, right? I'm 30, so you've developed for my whole lifetime. um I wonder sometimes if we're at the point of diminishing returns with things like fidelity, where I'm like, are we, I see, for example, like ray tracing hair physics. I'm like, how deep do we really need to go? I was just playing Dying Light a little bit earlier, for example, or Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain. I'm like, these games still, like, you sold this to me nowadays. Are my standards low? I'm like, I would be okay with that. Do you feel like, what is the final form to you? I mean, you never really know, right? But is it in the visuals department?
I never really thought like I never really thought that. As you can tell from the games, I've never really pursued like hardcore realistic fidelity
Mm,
for a couple of reasons. One is, um, it's hard to be better than somebody else there outside of a pure technology push, you know.
mhm,
And there are, like you said, I think that's where you find diminishing returns. I've always sort of gone for exaggerated aesthetics, like, and even in like, BioShock, BioShock Infinite, and Judas, because I think art direction is something that, unlike, because every, like I was watching a documentary shortly before we spoke about ILM,
mhm,
and they were talking about on in Star Wars, Lucas was talking about in Star Wars, we have to, you can't just buy something from a store. Everything we have to conceive, every single weapon, every single piece of furniture. And I'm like, dude, welcome to the party. um, you know, and we've always done that, and it allows you to really art direct
mhm,
from a place of real consistency, because you
mhm,
don't have to go. You can't go out and buy like your furniture, your clothes, like you do in a movie. Even your people, right? You're kind of, what do people look like in this world? And our
yeah.
games, they look a little more exaggerated than reality, slightly
Mm,
more, not overly, but slightly more, not like a Pixar character, but not
sure.
quite human. And I think that leaves us opportunities. I think if you go back and look at, say, BioShock or BioShock Infinite, they hold up really well,
Yeah.
primarily because we weren't going for hardcore realism. Where the games that are super hardcore realistic in 2007, they're going to struggle a little more, not just because the technology that makes things feel accurately, perfectly, right out of reality,
Mm,
that just, keeps going. And you
mhm,
get things like, you know, like ray tracing and stuff like that.
yeah.
I'm not super motivated as a gamer by that stuff.
Sure.
I'd rather have uh, unless you're doing something really art direction driven, then I get really excited.
Yeah. Yeah. I Is that part of like your design philosophy? Like your games have it, maybe it's, we can talk a little bit about this later with Judas, but like they have a timelessness to them. Like I always go back to the stuff you make. It feels like, oh, it just came out yesterday. Do you think about that when you design, when you go for the visual direction of the game and you're like, we're going to go for those more exaggerated proportions, like we care more about art direction? Is because you want people to be able to come back to your stuff 10, 15 years down the line and it
I
has aged well. There's none of that, visual hurdle for them.
I think that was like an added benefit. I don't think I thought of it like back when I started moving in this direction,
Mhm.
because we were mostly thinking about how do we get things to read at a distance. Because when you're doing a first
Mm.
person game and you're not doing cutscenes, like we don't do a lot of like, you probably know this. We don't like locking the camera in place like say
Yeah. Yeah.
most games would, like a Kojima might, or and everybody everybody's doing things for their own reasons and they work in their products. But for us, we always want to keep the player immersed in the world as much as possible without taking control away from them. And the problem is like when you have a character like Booker and Elizabeth, seeing what Elizabeth is thinking when she's not, we can't shove the camera in her face, because she's wherever she is in the world. A little bit of exaggeration sometimes helps those things project. We exaggerate a
Mm.
little bit in animation, a little bit of modeling. And
Gotcha.
I find that was incredible. That was our initial reason, and then following on that, I think then yeah, I think the games stay visually relevant for a longer period of time.
Interesting. Yeah, I always wondered about that a little bit. So I appreciate you answering that. On this note as well, 'cause one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is, historically you've spent a lot of time with these projects, and as someone who's been in the thick of it myself, you have those moments where you fall in love with your thing, you fall out of love with your thing, and those moments, we talk about the perspective of it all, but also there's the passion of it all. I always love to know what keeps a developer passionate, especially when you've gone through the process of like, developing shipping, you've gone through kind of these ups and downs. Is it just the love of the game, or what can you point to anything keeps your fire lit?
I'm a very stick to it of a guy.
Hmm.
Like I remember, like um, sometimes people leave products. I remember after System Shock 2, both my original founding partners left to go do other things for a while. One of them came back,
Hmm.
but I've never really saw as an option to leave a project during the project.
Mm,
And they didn't leave during the project, but other people have. So I'm kind of, especially on a product like Judas, where it's like goes for 10 years or something. You That really requires a kind of commitment that I think sometimes it requires somebody who just is sort of born that way. Who just is like,
sure.
I'm gonna stay on this project and I'm gonna finish it no matter what happens. Um, and then you need that for the tough times. And you get closer to the end of the project and you start seeing things come together, and then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier.
Mm.
Like there were some days on Infinite that I was like, well, fuck this shit. I can't finish this. Like I literally look in the window and be like, I can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you look in the mirror and you say, well, you did this and you did that. And they were pretty hard,
Mm.
so get back to work and shut the fuck up.
Mm.
And that's not everybody, but that's always been me. And
Sure.
it allows me to stick to it things. I don't even think I allow myself to say like, what would happen if I didn't, finish
Mm.
this project? It's just nothing I've really done.
Yeah. It's just part of the DNA. Like
Yep.
you just can't teach those things. Yeah. I always wondered about that because everyone's answer is a little bit different. So I feel that entirely. For me, it just comes down to like the pure passion of the love of the game and the fascination of it. Like for me, one thing that's really unlocked in my brain is when I'm playing things now, you start to have those those little moments where you go like, I think I know how they did that. And I always find that like this gratifying cycle of life as a player and a developer. It's very nice to see, and it just keeps my
So when you say,
fire lit.
sorry, when you say you see something in another game and you're like, and you figure out how they did some cool trick
Or
that,
yeah, like you feel like what was once magic. I always wondered if getting into the development space a little bit would start to disrupt the magic, but it becomes magical in its own way for me in some ways.
it,
Um,
look, it's definitely true. Like when I was a screenwriter and I understood, like, started to learn what movies were, and movies are really similar to each other in a lot of ways.
mm,
All movies have like this. Almost all movies you see have the same structure, the same like tension points. I'm talking about like page 30 in the script. Act one has to end, and this is what Act one ending means. And
mhm.
once you learn that shit, it's kind of hard to unsee it.
Yeah,
With
yeah,
games, a little better because yeah, I understand like that thing is not going to be interactive and that's not going to have physics. Those are the kind of things you sort of know ahead of
yeah,
time. And when it doesn't work that way, it gets super surprising. Like I think, we talked about Tears of the Kingdom was one of those games where I'm like, how the hell is that? Can I build a vehicle and it interact properly with the terrain mesh?
hmm
And it's running on a basically glorified iPhone. Like sometimes I am in awe.
yeah,
And those moments are incredibly amazing because it's hard to make
yeah.
me feel that sense of awe because I usually know what's going on behind the curtain.
Sure, sure.
It
All the
does.
more reason.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's a beautiful feeling. Um, as the development space has evolved a bit, I always just like to see where everyone's at with the famous two letters AI. Right, it's a hot button topic, and I know Judas is kind of getting into roguelite procedural elements to my understanding through reading through some of the older bites about the game. And when you compare the scope of the game, your team size, is this something like what's your stance on just like game development and usage of AI? Is it something your team's dabbling in? Are you able to speak to that at all?
I mean, right now we're using it. Where we're finding it very useful is managing massive data sets. What I mean by that is, if people have already developed games, like your bug database is tracking. Sometimes you have, you can get somewhere between 50,000, 200,000 bugs on a game.
Wow. Yeah.
And that is such a massive data set that just understanding what it is and organizing it is in, almost impossible. So
Mhm.
what AI is really good at, like I don't not super impressed by generative AI at this point.
Mhm.
Like I watch, it's pretty good at making static images. There's something once you sort of start seeing it a lot, you kind of can tell.
Yeah.
Like the movie stuff, I'm way more skeptical about because you notice that those movies are all one scene long
Yeah.
because they have trouble with persistence, and then they may better. This may be changing. Well, I'm not in that field, and I was a drama major. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I noticed some things about it that it tends to it doesn't like you can see a car going down a road, but the car can't turn back and go where it came from because it has no persistence. It's just
Yeah.
all it does primarily is it just says what's the next most likely frame
Yeah.
or the next most likely word, because it's modeling on large old data sets, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is a pretty impressive trick. Like
Sure.
I'm not saying it's not an impressive trick. However, what I'm excited for it is being able to do what we do in terms of like managing our bug database, like being able to have anybody without learning fancy tool sets. We use another thing called analytics, where the game is tracking like every time the player pulls the trigger, every time the player
Mm.
dies, every time they lose hit points. Every basically you can make an event for almost anything, and the tool set's really complicated. But if you point we use Gemini, you can put Gemini and say, okay, tell me how many players died while they were carrying this set of weapons and
Mm.
they were being fighting this monster.
Mm.
And that is incredibly useful to find out. And
Yeah.
it will give you a plain English answer back. We also do a ton of focus test dating,
Hmm.
focus tests, in with like both internally and out with outside gamers we bring in.
Yeah.
And normally what you have to do with that is you have to like, and it's incredibly useful, you watch sort of them play, and then we do interviews with them, and it's all like behind a one-way mirror so they don't know we're all watching.
Yeah.
And we do that because we want them to be completely honest, and we don't want them to hold back any criticism, because when the game goes out to the gamer, guess what, they're
Same
not,
deal.
they shouldn't hold back
Yeah.
criticism. They paid a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
So we've been testing the game for several years, and
Mhm.
we used to have to like read tons of reports, and every time we had a question we'd have to like go through pages and pages or just do like a search, like find this word. Now you can say how many players preferred hope when they were using this weapon on this type of level, and
Mm.
it will, that's what it does really well. It reads
Makes it.
and remembers
Yeah.
massive amounts of stuff. That's where we found it useful.
Yeah. So none of the creative stuff. This is all just more like the testing, the feedback, the data management portion of the game.
The only place we found it useful in the creative stuff is like very low level coding tasks,
Hmm.
which normally you either you use like, because most games don't, like all the code is not born at home in most games, because you use either open source libraries, or you license the Unreal Engine, or
Yeah.
you license a sound engine. So it's a good chunk of our code that's not already written in house. It's something we license or open
Yeah.
source, and I view that very similarly. It's not gonna, I don't think there's any time soon that you're going to say, go make Judas to an AI, and it's going to come back with anything even remotely. And look, it may be a thing of time. And look, then, your job, my job, like, if they're all, like, who knows, right? If the robot overlords come and take us, I tend to be a lot more skeptical of that. And my focus has really been on what I think it does really well, which is it can keep so much data in its brain in a way that
Mhm.
humans just can't. And that's
Yeah.
been incredibly useful. We even use it for like training people when they come on board,
Oh,
because
interesting.
like we have a database of our entire story. And so
Mhm.
like if a new writer comes on and they're like working on a script and they're like, hey, what is this? Why is Tom asking Hope about this thing? And you can ask like our story database and it will give an
That's
answer
cool. That's cool.
like at
That's
any
exactly
time
what
of
it
day or
sounds like it should be used as, like the data sets and getting feedback and onboarding people. That's perfect, man. I love that. Um, let's get a little bit more into Judas, because that's where the bulk of my questions really were for you. I actually timed it out well, because the System Shock 2 remaster just came out, so I had played that for the first time. So I ended up, when we timed everything out well here, I was like, oh, I got questions about that too. But I wanted to open with Judas because after playing System Shock 2, just doing some research, and also just it's wonderful sometimes missing these classics completely for me as a player, because then you start to see its true influence when you go back to it and you're like, oh, I see where like someone got that from and that from and that from. And like you mentioned, it's like a cycle of borrowing at the end of the day, but it just is so wholly original to its time period. It feels like such an important game. BioShock, of course, massive cultural impact, still video essays galore on it to this day. Can't be talked about enough. So when looking at Judas, do you carry those expectations on your team's shoulders, or is this something you try to largely ignore? Because I recently talked to the creative director for behind Expedition 33, Guillaume Broche, and I was like, hey, you guys kind of hit a home run on your first swing in the big leagues. Like, what's the feeling going into game two? And he's like, we just try to ignore it. So I wonder with you, you kind of built a legacy off just a very particular development style and hitting what I think have been just home run after home run. Do you think of it that way? Is that why you take that time? Like, what's the mindset and the expectations for yourselves when you're making a game like Judas?
I think the hardest time I had with that was on BioShock Infinite because BioShock was our first success. And sometimes you're like, okay, is that the only thing I know how to do successfully? Right? Because
Mm,
System Shock 2 and our other game, we had a lot of games that were really well reviewed, like System Shock and SWAT 4 and Freedom Force, and they just didn't sell any units. And so when you have a big hit, you really, it didn't feel radically different making it. So you're like, well, what was the difference? I don't know. And I think there's a real danger. Like when we did, originally the company wanted us to do another game set in Rapture, and they wanted us to do it pretty quickly.
mm,
And I didn't want to do that because I didn't really have another idea for Rapture. And I kind of felt like I was worried about the thing you were saying about Maddie, which is like, am I just going to be competing against myself here? And
mm,
even though I, said, okay, we're going to do a totally different setting, and I knew I had a sense of how it was going to sort of be fit into the BioShock overall thing. But even just figuring out what the BioShock overall thing is hard to do. What exactly is a BioShock game? You know what?
yeah.
Um, and they're pretty different. BioShock One and BioShock Infinite in a lot of ways. They're very similar in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. But the I definitely felt a competition with myself, and I really didn't like that. It was
Yeah.
really depressing, and because you start wondering, like, should I just do things the way I've always did it before?
Hmm.
And you always do some of that because, like, it's very hard to throw away. You look at a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese or Wes Anderson, and you see a lot of, you can tell it's a Martin Scorsese film or a Wes Anderson film generally, right? And with the Kojima game, probably similar. And there's certain creators who are, and there are creators who are like totally different every time. Um, and that's I think that the tricky part is it's games are so hard to make. There are parts of Judas that are more similar to BioShock, and there are parts of Judas that are really, really radically different. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have some things that people. I'm sure people notice. There's a gun in one hand, you got some powers in the other hand. We have
Yeah.
an additional hacking thing which we haven't shown off that much.
Mhm.
But the way the game works and the way the game is populated and the way you choose between these relationships is something we've never ever done before.
Mhm.
The world is decorated, the way encounters come in, the way you choose paths in the game, those are all so radically different.
Mhm.
The way stories delivered, that it was good to start with some basis,
Yeah.
but this is probably the biggest radical departure we've made since I did BioShock, because this is more of a departure in some ways than BioShock was to System Shock 2.
Interesting. Yeah, because when I was playing System Shock 2 and then going back and watching all the gameplay I could find on Judas, which looks excellent as well, tell me if this is a correct take, but it sounds like I was wrong. At first I was like kind of with everyone else who I see the headlines, BioShock in space. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, looks like it. Cool. Then I play System Shock and I start reading what you're saying. I start to see, there's more what looks like choice and consequence in Judas. And I feel like there was some choices along the way, at least at the opening of System Shock 2. And System Shock, in a lot of ways, to me, now that I beat it, I'm like, this is kind of BioShock in space. So I felt like you may have been looking a little more at System Shock than maybe I was incorrect on that. But was that more of a touchstone for you with Judas at all? Like going back to some of
Yeah,
those elements?
from a like core gamer standpoint,
Hmm.
like System Shock 2, so you played it's a pretty hardcore game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a very hardcore game.
Yeah.
And then BioShock, we try to find something that was kept. We were most interested in world building in BioShock, but that
Mhm.
sort of, giving the player a different set of powers than his best friend who's playing the game.
Mhm.
Um, and then some interesting moral choices. And then Infinite, we're trying to push even further more into a way more, even more accessible, where Judas is sort of somewhere between BioShock and System Shock, not between
Mhm.
BioShock and System Shock 2 in terms of its
Mhm.
depth.
Yeah.
And it's just a bigger game and a more complex game,
Mm.
but it's in service of doing something we started in Infinite, which is really how do you build a relationship with characters in games that feels way more granular than you normally see in games where you're really just making a few big choices, but really low level reaction and commentary, being able to play people off of each other and feeling people getting angry at you and then being able to pull them back from the edge of that anger to,
Mhm.
and then maybe piss somebody off at the same time. that was what we're most interested in. But we also, you know, wanted more. I think Infinite felt a little light to me on player expression.
Hmm.
And so we sort of went back a little, well, I think more towards player expression and build depth, and even the nature of the loop. The sort of, we don't I don't, like I've always said, like when we built System Shock 2, we brought in RPG elements, but I never said we're an RPG, right?
Hmm.
We always like, okay, what's cool about that we can bring into a first person shooter? Nobody had really done that before.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, we love that stuff. Because I play all kinds of games. And I said, what would make System Shock cooler to me?
Mm.
And that was this. And then with this game, it wasn't like I wanted to make, we always call this game, we have a bunch of pillars for the first game. And the first pillar is the game is a Judas simulator,
Mm.
which means that this is about putting you in the shoes of this person on this spaceship at this time in history and dealing with this set of problems. Everything else is secondary. And the rogue loop became, and I can't talk much about how it's actually expressed, because people are very surprised by how it's expressed. And I
Mm.
want to, in fact, we were gonna, when we did our first conversation with, when we first announced the game, we met with Skill folks and with Jeff and Ryan from IGN, and we showed them this part of the game, and they didn't want to show it to people. It's like, no, we don't want to spoil this. This is really, really cool. Because to us, it has to be part of the story. It has
Yeah.
to make sense. It has to be, you can't imagine the game without it.
Mm. Mm. That's a dark secret you're keeping from me, Ken, but I will respect it. That I'm very excited to hear about
It
that.
almost got spun. Those guys said no, and I thought that was really cool of them. I had never been, because you guys, understandably, journalists want the scoop, and
Sure.
they said we think this is cool enough that we're going to forgo the scoop, and I won't forget that. I really appreciated that.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm not surprised with like Skill Up and Jake and Lucy, them being involved. They're awesome people.
Yeah,
So
they love games.
yeah,
They want their audience to love games. It was a nice moment.
I love that for you. I'm very happy to hear that. I can't wait to learn what that is. I guess that kind of leads into one of the challenges. I was curious how you were handling Judas, because one of the terms that I didn't understand at first, but as you start peeling some of the layers back, I'm starting to put the pieces together. Pardon the pun. You use the term narrative Legos and kind of what that's like. It's a big talking point. Um, Given the game can play out so many ways versus what you kind of talked about with the, if you will, lack of player expression in something like Infinite, where it was a very direct story, and with the DLC, without spoiling for anybody, you just create this absolutely beautiful loop, right? Like, what's the challenge going away from here's the straight line of the story to here's like a straight line, maybe it funnels here, but then it's a scatter shot. Like, what is the challenge with
So
that?
hard,
Yeah.
so worth it. But I had never done a game like I had been so doing games that didn't have that kind of choice so much that I made a game about how little choice games had. And the would you
Mhm.
kindly twist in BioShock is
Mhm.
specifically me saying, "Yep, sorry, I suck. Can't figure this out. Let me comment on it because maybe that will make it better." And I played a lot of games, and I was always very I saw, we were talking about the things you see as a developer.
Mhm. Mhm.
What I love about like immersive sims and those types of games, I like games with a lot of simulation generally. Like Red Faction Guerrilla is one of my favorite games. It's not fully an immersive sim, just because you have so much control over the state of the world, and you can
Yeah,
do
it's
things in
awesome
so
game.
many different ways. And of course, Tears of the Kingdom is a game where I don't even know how they, like, the amount of ego they had to suppress to say, like, the gamer's going to figure this out, and they may completely break our game, and we're cool with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so hard to do.
Mm.
But with this game, as a narrative writer, also because I came from screenplays, where you like, where you're getting on page, to page 118, you're like, oh, those motherfuckers are gonna die when they see this moment. The ultimate control, right? And I was like, what? I gotta give that up, because that's what games are. Games are a conversation between the gamer and the game, right? Games don't stand on their own. I mean, no art stands on its own. That you're gonna see Star Wars and have a slightly different experience than I am.
Mhm.
But when you play Baldur's Gate, or you play a game that has or Red Faction Guerrilla, or Tears of the Kingdom, it is such a different conversation that you're having with the game than your friends having, or
Mm.
this guy's having. And I really wanted to make a game. I wanted to say, can we do that with narrative in a way that doesn't rely on the traditional methods? And traditional methods generally are, great games you can make out of them, like Baldur's Gate, or not Baldur's Gate, or Mass Effect. You're basically building sort of dialogue trees, and you're building combinatorial known states on various trees, on various hierarchical trees.
Yeah.
Do you think I think your audience will get that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the way you're explaining is like, I think to a level where if I'm not programmatically inclined, just to be completely clear, and like I'm following, so you're good. This is good.
So the smaller the chunks, so those are pretty big chunks of content. They're smaller than like purely linear games like Infinite, right? Because Infinite was like boom, 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 boom. And if you want to change anything, you'd have to tear stuff out and then bring stuff in and rewrite it together. And we had cut a level in Infinite, which we shouldn't have, because it probably took longer to cut it than to. We cut it for time.
Yeah.
And because it just wasn't working from a bunch of reasons. But it probably would have been faster just to keep it in. In this game, there were a bunch of things I wanted that, and this sort of notion of Lego, all Lego, when I say narrative Lego, all it means is when you get a box of Legos, there's a bunch of pieces in it that are created by very talented craftsmen, and they're all specific shapes and sizes. You probably, I'm sure you know the earliest Lego pieces. Now they're way beyond that than what I have.
That's insane. Yeah.
But the amount of things you can build out of those pieces is infinite.
Yeah.
Because those pieces are designed to know about each other. They know where they're, they know how to talk to each other, right? They know where they fit together and where they don't fit together. And I was trying to think, could you expand that model to games where basically instead of building levels or big conversations that are all one-offs or encounters, could you basically build a world that's sort of pseudo procedural where you can call in levels, the levels would have essentially almost no identity except a core shape, and then the story would say, okay, you know what, I need this type of district next because the player was just here and now he's working for Hope, and Hope is telling you about this thing that has to be in one of her labs or whatever, right? And that level then is generated essentially out of Lego pieces. It's not generated by like blocks like it's not out of primitive blocks like Minecraft.
Yeah.
Like everything is a handcrafted piece, a chair, a table, a monster. But then you can break things up. So you say a bedroom, and instead of you're building a bedroom, it's like, okay, what objects are tagged that can fit in a bedroom? What objects have I seen in a while? Hey, has there been a fight in this room? When's the last time we've seen this type of encounter? Hey, can this room be much darker? Could it be scarier? Where are we with, we even have something called, we have under the hood, there's something called an intensity curve, which is, if you write movie, so you know a little about movies and screenplay, right?
Yeah.
If you under the hood, right, there's this curve that goes on all movies, which are basically like you amp up the tension. If you use Star Wars, a classic example, right? You start off down the tension here, and it rises up over time, and you get to the Act 2 break, right? And that rises up, and then Luke decides to go to Alderaan, and you're like, okay, then it chills out for a while. And then they get to the Death Star, and it goes up, and then it gets to, oh my God, Ben Kenobi's dead. And oh my God, we're being followed to the Death Star. And then, we got to attack the Death Star, and it's massive. And then boom, the Death Star blows up, and the intensity dies down. But if you look at pretty much almost all modern movies, they map onto that exact same curve. And books and stories. And then but of course, you don't have to make that just that curve. You make a whole bunch of curves. But that is sort of teaching, why do we like that curve? And you listen to pop music, it's no different. Like I was just playing the song Whole Lotta Love for some of my team, and some people didn't even know it. I couldn't believe it. The Zeppelin song. Yeah. That starts off with just like bump down, just the guitar, right? Then the bass comes in, right? Then the plant comes in singing, and then the drums come in, and then it goes, then you get the riff going, and eventually it's like a 3-minute scene where he's moaning orgasmically into the thing, and eventually a drum fill comes out of it. And why do songs work that way? Why do they add bits and pieces like that over time? It's because whatever reason, back to the caves, we respond to that for some reason. Why? I don't know. Why do we respond to music? If I had to guess, it was probably an earlier form of language, right?
Yeah.
Because we just weirdly respond to it. Why do we respond to certain kinds of music? Why do we like certain notes going together but not other notes? But why do sometimes those notes even sound good? The notes that have a lot of dissonance in them, the two notes. And I study this stuff and I deconstruct it because I want to understand what are the fundamentals of what we enjoy. Because if you understand those rules, you can teach it to a machine, right? Not teach it. There's no AI. There's no we don't use in the game. There's no fancy AI determining this. It's basically here's what type of dramatic beats flow after other types of dramatic beats. Here's what happens when the player makes this kind of decision. What's going to feel dramatic? What's going to feel exciting? Even we have these curves, even under the hood, which is like, as you go deep into a level, generally, like the most common level is you go in and the intensity's low, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then over the level, it rises up in tension, and there's like a goal room, and you hit the maximum boss fight in there. Tensity blows up, and then things chill out for a while, right?
Yeah.
You can train at that. Because if you're controlling spawning encounters, if you're controlling music and sound, all those things can be tied to various points intensity curves. And then you can make those curves, and you can make counter curves that break up those patterns. We call them patterns and anti-patterns. So we're trying to deconstruct it, but at the end of the day, our goal is nobody knows. Like, if you have heard this conversation, you'll get it, but it should feel no different than any of our other games, except you have a ton more agency because the game knows how to respond.
Wow.
But it should feel like, if you like our previous games, we're not asking you to take any less than what you have from the previous games in terms of your expectations about storytelling.
Wow. I mean, first off, before I ask you another question, I got to say that might have been my favorite answer in an interview ever. That was fucking incredible. That was like 5 minutes I'll relive multiple times. What was the challenge of controlling that intensity slider, right? And trying to find those moments where it peaks and chilling out a little bit. A lot of your games also include a message, without obviously over revealing anything, because I know it's a special part about it all. I'm very curious if Judas is aiming for a singular message, a singular subject, kind of like how you talked a bit about with BioShock, or are you aiming for these different stories as they play out together or go down separate paths? Are you finding multiple messages within them? And if so, not to give you like 4 questions at once, but if you have those multiple messages, how do you convey all of that without losing the broader vision of what Judas is?
Well, all right. So let me ask you a question. When you say message, what's the message of BioShock 1?
I view it as like a lack of control. Well, it's also like the philosophy of like objectivity, correct? Like, like diving into what, the Fountainhead, I believe is the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was like that lack of control you spoke to earlier. And if that is the guiding theme, I'm asking, I guess, if there's an umbrella theme or is there multiple themes, I guess, within, like, say you mentioned Hope or Tom, like
I,
when,
I think it's always been my goal, and the audience will decide if I'm successful, is like to pose interesting questions rather than convey a message to people. Like, and that requires a certain amount of empathy. Like, even like Andrew Ryan, who's got his very, very, very dark murderous side to him, right? I wanted you to feel how he got there,
Mhm.
because I don't love, like, just, even though, like we talked about a few days ago, in a piece we did on our webpage about this concept of villainy in the game, we use that as sort of term of art that, and I don't know if you've read it, but
Yeah, I
basically
did.
any 3 of these characters can end up being essentially your antagonist, and you can get, and it's not just like a linear thing. They can start to really hate you and then start to like you again, all depending on what you did. Eventually, one of them is just going to get, like life, like, you choose, you choose friends, you choose
Mm,
dating partners. Eventually, you have to make decisions, right? You can't spin the plates forever, and that's a very human thing, right?
mm.
You make choices in your life. Maddie, you're doing this, podcast, and then you decide to make a game, and something's got to go, right? When you start making games, especially,
Very relevant. Yeah.
I'm sure there's stuff that you left, that you had to leave behind, to do.
100%. Yeah. It's impossible to
And
balance it all.
I find modeling those things in life, the fact that you can't spin plates forever, that you can start this relationship by trying to keep them all happy. And I really love watching people do that, and then finding out, over time, that, and you can do it for longer than other people. Like, that's the key. That's one of the key strategies of the game, is how long do you keep your have just in life. Like, you don't want to alienate anybody if you don't have to.
Mm.
But um you won't you if you only learn the most about one of the characters who you end up sort of finishing the game with, and there'll be a lot to come back to. There are huge beats that people will be missing by that we leave for other playthroughs, or your conversations with your
That's
friend.
got to be tough. Just not to interrupt you, but that's got to be tough to, like, again, you're so used to a particular style of storytelling, and now you have to accept, like, we have this fucking sick thing over here, and they will miss it if they go
it,
down the right of this fork in the path.
Maddie, it's about putting trust in your audience, and
Yeah.
I had to really, one of the reasons I think this has taken a while is like learning how to really do it differently and really putting trust in your audience and being okay with them just missing stuff. And we always had that with a lot of our story because, like, even in BioShock, a lot of the story exists in the audio logs, and you don't have to pick up any of them, right?
Mm, mm,
Um, and I found though when I talk to people, they have a better understanding of the story, and I than I would expect, mostly because I think it's up to them to find it, and they feel smart when they find something, and they feel like it's their moment, rather than the game stops and says, "All right, you're going to see this giant 10-minute story beat now."
mhm,
I don't think, at least for me, that's what games are about. Games are about a really intimate relationship between the person playing it and the game itself. And I wanted that relationship to be very different for different people. And it's been, I won't lie to you, man, it's been very difficult. That's why it's taken so long.
sure.
But we've passed our last existential test, I think, of what is going to be confident that this game is going to land. The final existential test is the QA process. I've been talking about massive data sets. Getting the game into all the states it could potentially be in and finding all the bugs is going to be our final big challenge. And
Mm,
that's why I've been so focused on things like AI tools that can go through like billions of data points or
yeah.
millions of data points.
Yeah, understandable. On that note, just to pivot from the storytelling, the economic challenges of the industry have been another kind of hot button topic,
Yep.
and you guys have, to my understanding, kind of floated independently, but also to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, because spoke to someone at your team that you're part of Take Two, right? Is that, or but you're also self publishing?
Yeah. Take Two structure is there's like Take Two as a parent company. Then there's
Hmm.
2K,
Hmm.
Rockstar, Zynga, and I think those are, and us, and we're like the tiny little rump label that nobody, like, we're so small. We're making one game, unlike the
Hmm.
others who all make tons of games.
Hmm.
And that happened after Infinite because we were no longer doing a BioShock game, and so I talked to my bosses at Take Two, Strauss Zelnick and Carl Sladoff, and I was like, well, can we just do our own weird little thing?
Hmm.
And there have been so many people who've been doing it successfully, so many indie developers, like, that didn't need this massive infrastructure to do this. So I'd rather sort of have, I'd rather be able to make those creative decisions without, sort of dealing with a larger corporate infrastructure. And I got to say, they've been very, very trusting with us, but we're also extremely transparent with them. We want to see our bug database. You want to see our user feedback testing. You want to play the game. You want to get a build. We're
Hmm.
always like that because at the end of the day, I don't, I we're just very straight with them, and we kept their trust for a long period of time.
Hmm.
But I think it's pretty rare. I think there's a lot of other publishers who wouldn't understand or wouldn't even understand the goals of what we're doing because once we have this tool set, which we've developed, sort of on top of the Unreal Engine, this sort of narrative Lego thing is incredibly powerful and I'll never build another game the same way. And it will, now that we know how to use it, the first 5 years we're building it. The next like 2 years we're figuring out how exactly the right way to use it. We're still figuring that out on some things. Some things we nailed very quickly. Some things we really take a while to get our heads around. But
Yeah.
it's such a powerful way of doing things. Like, for instance, if I want to move a story beat around, I want to add a story beat, it's no longer like going to a level, a physical part of a level and finding it and like making the level larger or anything.
Yeah.
We can just say, hey, as soon as you can, spawn in this
Hmm.
encounter, spawn
Hmm.
in this dramatic moment. And that's all at a central database. So it's so powerful. And the work you can do later in the game in terms of editing and moving things around, it's like going from a typewriter to a word processor. You're probably too young to remember
Mm,
working on a typewriter.
yeah.
But if you want to move a paragraph on a typewriter, well, you're fucked. You had
Yeah.
to literally like scissors and like glue,
Yeah.
and like it wasn't even just like whiteout. And now you
Mhm.
just assume, oh, that paragraph should go here. Let's move that around. Let's spell check it. All this stuff that you can do now. I remember writing on typewriters, and that's what it feels like. It feels like going from a typewriter to a word processor.
Yeah, those tools and systems are everything, right? Once you get them polished and the content building almost becomes an addiction. So this is a far flung question, but I figured I just always like to ask because some companies when they build their tools like this is our system now and forever. Is it something you're thinking about, just, not locking you into any game 2 sort of thing, but are you thinking just future, like, this will be very useful beyond Judas?
Absolutely. It's the and will be so much faster to get into it next time, because like I had no idea how to write a story for this thing at first. Like we just figuring out like not what story should we write, but what kind of story should you
Mm-hmm.
write and
Mm-hmm.
how should you write it. Like coming up with the whole thing of like, okay, I'm interacting with these characters and it's really about friendship with them or enemyship with them.
Yeah.
And how do you show the small gradations of that? Because like, in your life, it's not like you say one thing and your best friend says, screw you.
Yeah.
It's a slow, it's a, either it's a, or you meet the love of your life and you say, hey, and then she marries you. This is a slow, whether it's a seduction or it's a alienation, it happens over time, and you never really know when she's going to fall in love or when he's going to say, screw you, Maddie, I never want to see you again.
Yeah.
And modeling that and how you model that with storytelling and build up to that and heat up to that and make that feel, and then, well, they come back from the edge and they start liking you for like, how do you write all that and make it feel that's not coming from robot? Not coming, well, it is, the characters are technically robots in the game, but they read as human. Like
Yeah.
they feel like it's not like beep boop,
Mm-hmm.
that took a very long time just to figure that out. And now that we figured it out, it's so much nicer because it's so much faster to write.
Because now it's just like, I have an idea and there's not the, how do I get this in? It's like, I know I can.
Yeah.
So
And
can we
there's
do it?
some tools that are so reliable. Like if we want to have leaders showing up and talking to you, we can do that. If we want to make that highly dynamic and dependent upon what's happened, we can put in specific phrases instead of other phrases that refer to things on
Mm-hmm.
a very low level. And it's so powerful to write for once you understand it. So, it's like going from, as I said, it's like going from a typewriter to a word processor, but you had to learn what saving a file was, right, on a word processor. You had to learn what printing meant.
Yeah.
Printing just used to be hitting the key. Typing and printing were the same thing at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Had to learn all those things.
So a lot of I guess I have 2 questions to build off of that, but just so we can get back to the central point real quick. A lot of your time that you've been able to take, you've had just, I guess, patient leadership at the top. I think they also understand that, like, what you and your team can make can really set the world ablaze if the cultural impact of other titles before this were anything to go by. So is that the kind of the correct understanding of it all? Just like you guys have been a responsible partner at the end of the day, and the kind of trust is there after a couple of console generations together.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working. It's funny. I never had a job. I never stayed at a job for longer than a year and a half. I've been at Take Two. We sold the company to Take Two in like 2004, and I've been there since then, and 21 years. And
Mm,
I have a very the guys, my bosses put a lot of faith in me, and all the powers that be put a lot of faith in me, and
mm,
I'm really appreciative. I do think that they believe in. I mean, you listen to Josh talking. I've known a lot of CEOs. Some of them are not always not full of shit, right? And Strauss tends to pretty much, when what you see is what you get with him,
mm,
and when he believes in something, he'll back it, as you can tell by us.
mm.
There's a lot of titles that take a long time, but he knows that quality is, especially now in the industry, the challenges face. Like the one thing that the unifying factor of all the things to do well is quality. You can't. That doesn't mean everything quality does well, but people really are sensitive to quality, and I've always been sensitive to it, and I totally get it. Like games are expensive,
Yeah.
and it's a big investment. And I feel I'm never somebody who looks down on my audience. Like I'm so grateful that people have afforded me the ability to go to work and make this stuff every day. And I really feel I owe a debt to them.
That's beautiful. On the note of this story and building out content more, um, it feels like, again, this, this could just go as long as you want it to be, and it's probably hard to, at times when you get excited about it, bring a pair of scissors to it. But is there a way you could comment on, or maybe you don't know yet, like the length of Judas? Because to me, it sounds like there's so many ways to play it. It's as long as you want it to be, but I don't know how long we'll use the term route would be.
I'm pretty comfortable going to say I'm pretty comfortable, but things should look at the end of the day, the game should be as long as it's good, right?
Mhm, mm,
And that sometimes you gotta like, you know, because the game is built the way it can, we can some degree make it longer or shorter in ways that it's other games that is harder than in other games. It's harder in other games. It's harder to do.
Mhm.
I have a feeling of how long the game should be. That's mostly a gut feeling. We'll, at some point, our next big, we'll have a big milestone, which is playable completely start to finish the game. And then that will take a stab at what that length is. It's going to be different for different people too, because people
Sure.
can move through the game at different lengths. Some people are going to want to play the field more with the leaders. Some people are going to want to, that will have impact on it.
Mhm.
But really, we're going to test it and see what feels about right. And we target that. But again, it's not going to be like, we don't have the same level of control you do in, say, like a Last of Us or something like that, because
Mm,
so much of it is dynamic.
right on. On that other note, we were talking a bit about, the BioShock and Fountainhead. A lot of your work has driven me to check out some of the books that you've kind of referenced over the years that have inspired you. Are you able to speak to any yet for Judas that have inspired it, or has it even worked in that way?
It's funny, the last 10 years, and just like a week ago, my wife bought me a book for my birthday, and I had stopped reading books. I was mostly listening to them on audio, and then, so I listened to a ton of books,
Mhm.
but I would mostly listen to them when I was falling asleep, and I hadn't got into books. But I've been reading. It's been 10 years of reading like everything on the internet, and so like
True.
YouTube is an amazing source if you want to learn about things. Like so there's so much like the science of the game. Like I'm not a scientist. I haven't taken math or science since the 80s.
Mhm.
And but I'm you can probably tell from the games, there's always things, politics and science, that I get interested in. In Infinite it was genetic, um, about plasmids and things like that, which was
Mhm.
before CRISPR. Now we actually have that stuff. It's called CRISPR. And
Yeah.
then Infinite was, I had read. I didn't start with the quantum mechanics stuff, but that period, reading about that period and reading about what's going on in science, just the revolutionary nature of Einstein and Max Planck and all these guys. It just was like, I just got so fascinated by it. I'm like, okay, how do I get people who are interested in the shit I'm excited in, who aren't super technical? How do I make this accessible to people? Art
Mm,
Deco was, an architecture style I was really interested in making people excited about.
yeah.
And in this game, we kind of started with robotics and AI, but this was before the current AI revolution. And fortunately, I had a conversation with somebody. Um, this is about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and we had these robot characters and everything.
Mm,
But we were sort of thinking about them more traditionally. And I had this meeting with we have some science consultants, and we were talking about space travel. Actually,
mm,
it turns out he had been involved in these early large language model, what we call AI now, which is basically
mm,
based on what they call large language models. And he was saying he was involved working with the government to predict future terror attacks based upon chat that had gone on online
mm,
prior to earlier terror attacks. So he was looking for patterns from the past to predict the future.
mm,
And that's really, that's how they largely work. Like when Google auto completes a sentence for you in Gmail, what's it
mm.
doing? It's read every fucking um, you know business letter of all time, and it's uncannily good because it's using the past to predict the future.
Yeah.
Um, and once I understood that, the notion of how the AIs worked in the game got a whole new level, because it was sort of coming real. There's this
Mhm.
thing called the Turing test, um, that a great computer scientist, Alan Turing, came up in the 50s, and it was basically, and this was around for a long time. He said the way we'll know a machine is sentient is when you can have a conversation with it and you can't tell it's a machine. And we will clearly pass that, but these things are also clearly not sentient at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and I just got so fascinated with the ability to predict the future using large, massive past data sets, and how both interesting and how scary that is. Like that's
Mm.
sort of what was that Spielberg film, where they predict the future, the
Oh
ladies and the
man.
bats. Oh, Minority Report. That's a little different,
I
but
haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen it.
but I found it really fascinating. And
Mm,
so yeah, there's that I got very interested in that. I got very interested in like deep space travel, you know, time dilation as you approach the speed of light, all these things,
mm,
which I sort of heard about, but I started reading a lot of science, a lot of conversation. One thing the AI has me is just like, hey, if I wanted to do on a spaceship and I want to get to Proxima Centauri in 40 years, what
Mm,
future technologies like that are potentially possible should I look at? And it will sort of point you in the right direction. I go do a ton of research. And I'm like, you know,
mm.
nuclear powered spaceships and wrapping around, black holes and all these other things that can't be done now, but might be done because our game is set in the future.
Gotcha. So it's come down to internet research is kind of the nutshell way of looking at it. Internet research consultants, that combination.
I definitely read some books. It is definitely harder reading a book about, large language models than it is, say, reading Atlas Shrugged. Right? There's a great. I've talked enough to people and I thought about it where I really I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. And look,
Yeah.
I'm lucky I get to take things I find weirdly fascinating and turn them into games.
Stories, yeah, games, yeah, interesting. Um, we talked a bit about the audio diary kind of storytelling element. Is this something you've evolved so many ways you've told the stories in your game in Judas? I was so interested to learn that System Shock 2 has audio diaries. I was like, oh wow, this is like kind of started back here. I always
Sorry,
thought it was with the
System Shock One who invented it. I didn't invent it.
oh okay,
The
sorry.
writer came before me, and I loved them as a mechanism. Go ahead. Sorry,
No, no, you're good. No, it's good to know. So this has been going on for a while now. Have you dabbled with like, can I evolve this, or are you just kind of keeping it traditional? I'm not even sure. Is it even in the game?
It's in the game.
Okay.
We just keep adding new modalities of communication, right? So, like
Mhm.
in System Shock 2, that's all we really had because it was so hard doing anything else. And they worked really well because they were based, from a technological standpoint. Well, it's funny. In the first System Shock, the game came out on floppy disks, and the audio logs were not audio; they were text because they didn't have enough space.
Mm,
Then a CD version came out. That's the first time I played it, and they had in-house people basically record the text into audio logs, and they had really great sound designers, so they processed them to sound good. And when I heard that, what I loved about it was the confessional nature and the intimacy of what you
mm.
get. It was very naturalistic. What I mean by that is it wasn't like big acting. It was very normal,
People
like
talking.
average people caught up in
Yeah.
an extraordinary situation. I always like that type of writing.
Mm,
And so I really dug into it. And then BioShock, we went further. I mean, now we have those, but we also have, you know, so many, like, the leaders who show up as holograms, who interact with you, who do things, who, you can have a leader in the world who's gotten mad at you and you'll be sort of stealthing around. The game can detect that you're stealthing, and a leader will show up and point at you, be smart enough to know there's enemies around,
mm.
smart enough to show up and be like, hey, robots, she's over there. If
Oh.
she's pissed off you, and that's like all fully dynamic, and that
Mm.
happens tons of ways. We have so many new ways you can communicate, but I still love using audio logs because they're so confessional,
Yeah.
and you can really just write from the character, the heart of the character.
Yeah.
Not
I,
lying.
I love that. It's funny. One of my questions is actually going to be, what do you find most fun about Judas? But I think would be more interesting to ask you is, what have you been playing the game and ever been just surprised, like, oh shit, that went like that? Like kind of what you described there, where it's dynamic and you just get called out by a character that you've had interactions with in the past, and so they're kind of out to gun you down. Has there been anything in your own game that you're just like, whoa, I didn't see that coming, from
Yeah,
just how dynamic it is?
that's what's great is because it's dynamic enough. It's probably the first. I don't tend to play my games after I finish working on them because
Mm,
I know them so well. It's hard.
mm,
You can't really know this game that well because so much of it's dynamic. Um, there are plenty of good, like there's still plenty of good stories for you to follow there that are
yeah,
more traditional, but they live in this mix of all this dynamic stuff as well. That I think I'm going to actually play this one after I'm done with it because it's still going to be
nice.
surprising me.
I love to hear that. Um, Again, as I was playing System Shock 2, I was thinking about, because this was when I played it, when it first came out. Not first came out, I should say the remaster first came out. We were just preparing, like, when would we chat and everything. And I noticed there was a dentist machine that stood up. It had like a human body attached to it in one of the Judas trailers. I was like, oh, I'm immediately getting the creeps. Kind of like System Shock 2 is a little bit more of a scary game than I anticipated, in like all the right ways. Like, it's very tense, very atmospheric. You mentioned something with like lighting earlier in like a bedroom and the kind of maybe horror elements you could push. Is that something you're kind of tinkering with as well in Judas? This idea of returning to some of those, horror is a strong term, but like creepier routes, unsettling, atmosphere. Well, your games are always atmospheric, so I guess that's the wrong
Yeah,
term too.
I think that's another way. It's somewhere between BioShock and System Shock 2. It's
Mm.
probably more not as, I don't know. It might be more on par with System Shock in terms of it's not. Part of the reason System Shock 2 is so scary is because every hit point is like matters and every bullet matters. Like it's really hard. Like
Yeah.
we were really looking at the original Resident Evil and things like that. And
Mm.
when we made that game, I don't know if you ever played the original Resident Evil, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
brutal. You know,
Yeah.
you find
Oh,
a bullet and you're like you know, and you yeah, you
make
light
it
it
count.
quick. You know, you're so happy. Um, and System Shock 2 was very hardcore that way. But I think so. We're not. I mean, I think we'll have a like difficulty level that is super hardcore.
Sure.
I think. But our goal, but in terms of the sort of vibe and the tension and the spookiness and I think tension is what I'm most interested in. Like, build like the um, building up. How do you build up tension over time? Make the player feel nervous. And yeah, I'd say there's probably way more horror slash tension building elements in this game than you've seen
Cool.
in certainly than in Infinite and probably more than in BioShock.
Awesome. Yeah, because the one that hangs with me in System Shock 2, I'm forgetting her name, but it's the chick who's like the maiden or something like I
Yeah,
forgot
the midwife.
your midwife. Dude, unbelievably terrifying. Like, I mean, granted, I'm an easy target, but this thing, like when you turn the corner and it's staring there looking down the pipe at you, I'm like, oh shit, he's gotta get away as
Yeah,
soon
I
as
mean,
possible.
we didn't have much. The only thing we had really was everything. I mean, look, the game did not. It was not a great looking game.
Mhm.
Not because the art team wasn't doing their best or trying really hard, or we weren't. It was just it's a very primitive time. You
Yeah.
had like a couple hundred polygons in the world, and the character. I mean, you saw they probably look a little better in the remaster, but there's real limitations to those. The scale
Yeah.
rigs on those characters, and but again, none of that is a critique because those guys, despite that, Thief and System Shock 2 were built on that engine, all the Thief games. So it really was a powerful platform in a lot of ways, just not
Mhm.
visually, not as much. And so we really relied on audio. And for me, it was like, what's scary? Something that has an intersection with something that's terrifying, but also intersects with things we experience in life every day.
Mhm.
The sort of maternal caring of that thing, but not
Mhm.
for human babies, for these alien babies, um, but still have that love and that sense of a mother figure.
Mhm.
I always felt that was a good way to get to horror, uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, so
Oh,
that was
yeah.
those
A
tools we
lot
used.
of horror kind of hangs on what you can't see, right? Like it's always that. So they worked in your favor a lot there.
Especially when you have an engine like that, you really wanted. I mean, that's why even things like the little monkeys in the distance, like the sound propagation choices that people made in that engine and the sound designers were so much of the horror of it
Mhm.
because you could hear something in the distance and you couldn't quite recognize what it was, but it wasn't good.
Yep. Yep. It's beautifully tense and it's such a interesting back and forth experience because sometimes the music is just very like I'm tapping my feet, I'm kind of moving with it. I'm like, this is a little out of place, but in all the right ways. Like just they were having fun with it. And then it just gets quiet and just you hear like the moaning and the groaning. You open up a bedroom that's partially on fire, blood on the wall, someone hanging from the roof. You're like, Jesus Christ, like this game just has a slider that goes at 0 to 100 basically.
Yeah.
Um, I had some questions about BioShock. Now, if you're not comfortable answering these, totally fine. But just on the nature of, as a huge fan of the franchise, I look toward this new entry, which hit some speed bumps, and I just wonder from the outside looking in, what that's like for you as a creative, right? Like this was the thing that you and your team made. It's your baby. Now, Rod Ferguson's the head of the BioShock franchise. They're working on what we'll call BioShock 4. What do you feel knowing like how do you some creatives maybe don't even have this issue, but I'll just kind of pose the question from this angle. You tell if I'm right or wrong. How do you have to fight back a little bit, where yourself back a little bit, where you're like, I want to go and like be part of this? Or have you kind of had your full fill of BioShock? Like I did my whole loop, I'm good. I'm
I,
in on Judas. Like, is there ever any desire, curiosity, thoughts, or feelings when you see where BioShock is and you know there's going to be more that you desire to be involved? Are you like consulting at all? Like, is there any help you offer on the next BioShock?
Not really.
Mhm.
I um it was much harder on when BioShock 2 happened because I didn't really I wanted to go in a different direction, and for a while it was unclear whether that was going to happen, and there was some disagreement there. On this one, I decided, that I sort of I didn't know what else I had to say in the BioShock front, and so I walked away from it, and part of that was not related to the franchise or the people. It was just that feeling I had all the whole time that I was competing against myself, and it made me wonder, like, whether I want to do sequels
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It is a strange thing. It can be really liberating, but it also can be kind of a trap. So this time I sort of, with my blessing, I said, please, make something cool.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of smart people there. Rod's obviously a really smart guy. He really helped us finish Infinite. Um, so no, I haven't been involved. I mean, and I don't really know, like, don't really know. And the labels are pretty. We don't really interact that much. It's sort of that we are almost like small little separate groups, and we
Mm-hmm.
help each other out where we can. So I think the thing is, like, me just coming in and skydiving in and saying X, Y, and Z. That's not really how games are made. You
Yeah.
have to be there every day.
Yeah.
You can have a great idea one day, and the next day, when you look into it further, it turns out you're the biggest idiot in the world. So I don't think you can come in like, oh, let's bring in, Ken, who's going to come in and, punch things up or something. I
Yeah.
don't think, even if anybody wanted that, which, I don't know if they would, I don't think it works super well because you
Yeah.
really be there.
Yeah. There's never like I don't mean, I guess the question could sound like I'm asking you like, Ken, would you please work on BioShock again? But I guess for you as the creative, like there's no desire because you have said all you needed to say. So there's no like ever internal fight with yourself.
Yeah. And to be honest and really selfish, like on Judas, I get to make the final calls on things. And
Totally
I
understandable.
like both having that. And I hold, I tell people whenever our games come out, like, if you're going to be mad at somebody, be mad at me, right?
Mm.
Because I've had that liberty to make the games the way I wanted them make, with very small exceptions. But Judas, nobody's really got in my way. And
Mm.
so so if I were to involved in BioShock and it came out a certain way, it's kind of hard for me to either take credit or take anything for it because I would only have worked on it marginally. Where I find that I have to, like, even before I used to do multiple projects at once, now I'm really a one project guy because I just want to put all my energy into it and
Yeah.
every day on it. So it can, it gets the best chance it can to be awesome.
Yeah. Do you ever have thoughts about that kind of boomer bust development style, or do you even think about it as such? Because I was talking to Brian Fargo, who has like, I was on his Moby Games page, and it's a mile long. Like this guy has shipped a
2000 games.
tremendously stupid amount of video games. And now he's like, I'm working on one thing, and we've been working on Clockwork for a while, and I'm loving every bit of that.
No,
So,
I was running around this pond in when I actually listened to it, and he was saying that it's nice to focus, right?
mhm.
It used to be so
I
divided.
appreciate you listening. Thank you.
I know, it's a good show. I listen to
Thank
good
you.
shows.
Thank you.
And and I think Brian is enjoying something that I'm enjoying, which is to be able to focus. Because at one point, I think we were Irrational was doing tries the Lost, tries Vengeance, SWAT, and Freedom Forces of Third Reich, and I was trying to run the company and all this other stuff. And we hadn't sold the company yet, so I had a lot of business responsibilities that I don't have anymore, and
Mm,
it was miserable.
mm,
It was just so hard because I just felt I couldn't give any real care about anything because I was task swapping so fast. I really enjoyed it. It's probably smarter. Like, if I was really smart, that's why probably people grow. Like, they gave me this label, and I've never come back to said I want to grow and do more things like that. It's probably smarter because it's look when you're releasing one game in 10 years or something. Obviously, the stakes go way up, and if you had multiple titles, that was a way to reduce it. But I also felt that I really need to put my full attention at this. Maybe after this, we can find a way to leverage the technology we built to do more than one thing, or bring
yeah.
an outside group in to do something on it. But right now, I just really
Mhm.
I don't see how I could do it without just being fully focused on it.
Totally. No, it totally makes sense. Yeah. The urge to like when you're in the middle of that thing, not think about what's next is something that I struggle to sometimes fight off. Not because, you're losing interest, but it feels like I feel like what you described is a little bit where I'm at, where a lot of my business management, it goes kind of beyond the game. Like we're trying to bring on people, onboard them at the same time as like creatively direct. And then I got my whole YouTube business to run because we haven't sold anything yet, and we don't want to ask anyone for money until we have a product to sell. So it's like I have to make my videos to pay the people that we have employed. And so sometimes you're just task swapping so much. I get why you get to that point where you're like, I just want to make something. And that's all that effectively
Being
matters.
an entrepreneur is hard. So it's your company too.
Yeah.
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 So you got to deal with all the company stuff, and
Yeah.
it's nobody. It's hard. It's really hard and
Yeah.
really boring. Some of that stuff, right?
I've probably deeper down the line, it'll be boring for me, but right now it's been just a lot of valuable lessons. You know, we've had our first run with publishers and kind of going through those conversations and seeing who's careful with it and who's very like, you know, some are like, we won't give you feedback. We don't want to sway your project. Okay, thanks. Some are like, hey, this is really good. We get in deep talks with them and they're like, we want to see how you progress on your own a little bit further. Some will give you what looks like an AI prompted response. And they're like, for any one of these reasons, we have rejected you.
Right.
So there's been a lot of lessons on just how people, you know, learning price tags for things like, oh, we want to localize. Like, what does that look like? Just having those important conversations. It's been this kind of educational journey. But I guess once you go through it, maybe once or twice, yeah, I'll probably be at the point where I'm like not loving that as much. And it's like, I just want to make things. I mean, even now there's a little bit of having all those meetings. And I used to never be a meetings guy, but now I'm like in so many meetings just to make sure the operation's running smoothly. It pulls you away from the things that you're really passionate. Like for me, I'm a big storyteller. Like that's when I review games, I grade writing probably more harshly than most in the industry because I value good writing a ton. That's kind of like where my specialty is. And when I'm managing business shit, it's like it just pulls you away from where your brain wants to be.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So
No,
yeah.
I mean, it's like using a different part of your brain. You've got to get that part warmed up.
Yeah.
It can be really good. Like there are parts of career I really enjoyed the multitasking. I think as I've gotten older, I sort of old fogey down to really just digging in on one project again.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Well, Ken, as we're rounding things up here, I just had one real final question for you. And it was just simply this for anyone listening. I asked everyone I've interviewed this so far, and I always love to hear the answer. If there's any upcoming game developers out there listening, and I know right now is kind of like this time where seeing layoffs, studio shutdowns, but indies kind of booming. The way AA games are made is changing so much. AAA seems a little bit unbalanced. There's so much uncertainty in the air, but I always find this question to be very grounding for those who still love games, kind of like we do, enough to just aspire to like, I want to do this. I want to be part of this. If you could connect with any brand new game developer and give them like, hey, 3 things you got to know, what would those be?
That's a good question, Matty. One is, I do think that we haven't done a great job of making it clear to people how difficult being in the arts is and how challenging it is because so many people want to be in it. And there's a lot of people who are going to get mad at this, but it's a life decision because it is so demanding and there's so much competition that it's a lot easier sometimes just to do a job outside of the arts. And I've done both. And the struggles I've had in art and the pain I felt in art there's like no other part of my career has done that. And the amount of work I've had to do to be successful as an artist versus, you know, I was a computer consultant. I didn't work that hard. You know, I was good enough. I was a graphic designer. You know, I wasn't like waking up in the morning, like, how do I become, I'm out up at 2 a.m. figuring, how do I get better at this? How do I do this? How do I innovate? How do I change? Because I didn't really care. So you really have to care. And you also have to have an expectation that it's going to be difficult for I'm not talking about games. I'm talking about you want to be a writer, you want to be a comic book artist, because there's so much competition. The truth is that the audience, they don't care about your problems. That's not even a dig on them. Like, you know, when I buy a pack of Oreos, I'm not really thinking about the people at the Oreo factory, right? I just kind of want my Oreos and I want to go in front of my TV and enjoy my Oreos. And if they're bad, I'm going to be disappointed. But if you love it, the ability to, so the second thing I would say is talent is really important. Stick-to-itiveness is the most important thing. Being able to take that arrow and be like, I'm going to keep going. There was a time right when we started that we lost. Irrational had just started a month earlier. I had quit my job at Looking Glass and I don't know where I was going because I had improved myself. I hadn't shipped a game. And I thought if I screw this up, I'm going back to computer consulting where I thought I'd just be sad. I didn't mind it, but it was not something I was passionate about. It was something I
Mhm.
did. And we lost our first project a month in. And I remember being on a run and I said, I'm so depressed. I don't know how we're getting another project. There's no money left. Oh my God. And it was my job. I was the guy who had to go out and sell stuff. We didn't have a game to show. And I was like, well, this is where most people quit. And if I don't quit now, if I just decide not to quit, that's going to give me a huge advantage. And it was
Mm.
absolutely true. There were so many times in my career where I was like, I can't get up. I can't get up. No, I can't do it. You know, count me out. And I got up. And because I did that, I kept going. Um, and that's there's a cost to that. There's a real cost to that. But if you want to be creative, if you want to be driving, be able to make creative decisions, you want people to engage with those creative decisions. That's kind of the price you have to pay at the door. I guess if there was a third thing, I would say is never argue with your audience. You'll
Mm.
never win that argument. I
Mhm.
see a lot of people online like telling the audience what to think of their game. That doesn't mean you have to make a game. You have to listen to every single person. That doesn't mean you have to um, do whatever anybody says. Because sometimes the greatest things come out of somebody's nobody thought of before, right? Nobody's thought
Mhm.
of before. And look, I got plenty of skepticism. Hey, they're working on this game for 10 years. Oh, they don't know what they're doing. I get it all the time. I've always had on every part. Infinite was the same. And look, you never know. The game will come out. It could be the best game ever. It could be like Ken Levine, as nobody's talking about. But listen to the feedback, take it in. Generally, your audience won't tell you what you should do, but often they'll tell you if enough of them say it in concert what you shouldn't do. Because if they played it and they've seen it and they don't like it, there's so many things on Judas. I was like, oh, this is a great idea. And then we tested enough and I'm like, no, Ken, you're an idiot. This is not a great
Mm.
idea. And
Mm.
that was my ego, not my wisdom, who was thinking
Mm.
it was a great idea. So
Mm.
you really have to be open to criticism and you have to have a thick skin. And at the end of the day, the great thing is you don't have to do what they say, but you sure as hell should listen to it.
Mm. Brilliant advice. Absolutely wonderful way to end it, Ken. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And of course, thank you for the games you and your teams across this industry have made over the years. They've been just so influential to how I think about video games, how I think about art. And like many out there, they've just cracked open my understanding of just the levels you can reach. Like what was once thought of as a toy is now such like a powerful medium because of games like yours. So just very thankful to have the time, the privilege to pick your brain and to just chat with you a little bit. So just thank you for being on the show for all you shared today. It's super appreciated.
It was my pleasure, Maddie. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed. And until next time, we'll catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. Love you all. Peace.